Good evening. Welcome to the Planning and Development Committee of Athens City Council. The first order of business, I think, is to congratulate Scott and Heather Thompson, who have a new arrival, Kylie. And he's here with us tonight anyway, so congratulations. Secondly, because we're structuring these committee meetings a little bit differently than our traditional council meetings, we're trying to accommodate the government channel and make sure that people who are watching at home can hear everything that's going on and can see who's talking. So during the committee meeting, I'm going to ask people, when you want to talk, to say my name first, and then I'll recognize you. It'll give the cameras a chance to be actually pointing at the person who's talking. It'll help it make more sense to people who are watching at home. We haven't always been that formal, but we're going to try tonight. We do have room at the table for folks as they're presenting to us and want to talk with us to sit up here, but not for everybody who's here. So the first item on our agenda is a recommendation from the Planning Commission on a minor subdivision in the Plains. And Mr. Wayner is here if you want to come and join us at the table. That way folks at home can hear you with the microphones. Start off by telling us who you are and where you live. And
I'm Mark Wayner, and I live at 8 Sunset Lane in the Plains.
This is, if I can help Mark a little bit. Right now, he has a parcel that's 3.6 acres, borders on Sunset, and we're at 682. Here's 33 over here, and the access ramp coming up on this side, and then Connet Road would be on down this way. And what he's proposing is to take the lot on Sunset and make it 110 feet wide, and then create 2 lots, right?
Actually create 3 lots.
And then behind it, create a 3rd lot that would get the road frontage
off of Sunset. And
Well, 2 would be on Sunset, 1 would actually be on 682. And
one's on 682,
Right,
one's
lot
on
2.
Sunset and 682, and one's just on Sunset.
okay.
And we need a variance because the lot on 682 only doesn't meet the depth to width ratio. It's a piece of land, I've got pictures of it, that pretty much has to be that way because of the lay of the land.
You want to go ahead and pass those around to
You're
people?
right. This shows it's this piece in here, it's actually a dished out piece of land, and then to the right, you can see where the house sits. Currently there's a house sits, there's a line of trees, so there's sort of a natural break here to separate that piece off. And I think I have another one.
And just before the meeting, the mayor and I were talking about the proposed widening of Route 682 and whether that is going to have any impact on this.
I talked to them today.
To ODOT?
Yeah. We initially called ODOT to ask about right-of-way on 682, and they said that since there's a guardrail there, they thought it would be okay. When I went over there today, I met with a person who claims they are in charge or knows what's going on there, and they're supposed to get back with me on Monday with the definitive answer about access there. The widening actually starts beyond the piece of property, which would be what's south at that point, towards Big Bear and Rutland.
Toward Connet Road.
Toward Connet Road,
Connet,
right.
I think, is right about where they're going to start it, I think.
They're actually starting a little before that, at least from the map I saw today. So it's not going to be affected by that, but he's a person who at some point will give us, he will sign off apparently at some point about access to 682. If they can't grant it at that point, well then the whole thing goes, yeah, right. So we should have that. He says he'll call me on Monday on that.
And that's a question about whether there would actually be a road frontage that had access onto 682?
Right.
Okay.
The initial was, it should be okay, but that was just a call into the office in general.
Okay. Questions?
Debbie? So the lot's going to be 3 lots. One's 29,000 square feet, 28, and the other one's about 2.2 acres, so it's not equally divided, it's just,
It's divided in half because the one piece of land doesn't fit geographically with the other piece, and that piece is being split into two lots. Currently, there's a house on the 682 side of the one.
Hey, I think Nancy had something?
Debbie, is this part of Drescher's subdivision?
No, it's not.
It's not?
No, it's
Not
right
even
next to it.
Right next to it, but the lot was never
The lot
included?
was never in it. It was just, it was never in it. It was owned by different people.
Anybody else? It seems to me that we should probably wait until we hear the answer from ODOT before we move this out of committee and make sure that we're not moving forward and creating essentially a landlocked lot. So we could probably bring this up at our next committee meeting when you have an answer from ODOT.
It's your decision. When we talked with Steve Pearson, he said that if you go ahead, because when we were in front of the Planning Commission, the same question came up, and it was that even if it's approved by you, if it doesn't get signed off, then, like you said, it becomes poof anyway, so.
Well, Nancy, as my fellow committee member,
Okay. Well, we can, want me to move?
do you want to just hold off until we
Right,
have an
he
answer
wouldn't
from
have to
ODOT?
come back, but once we have the answer from ODOT, then it's either forward or no, right?
Right.
So you won't have to come back.
So are there any other concerns with this proposal? So, Paul?
what's the utilities situation there? This is
We've got sewer access and water on the front lot and the back lot are good. We talked to Castler, and he said that's okay. As the field part of it depends on what would be done with it at some point. Currently, there isn't, but potentially there could be, but they would need to put in a lift station or something similar to what they have at Rutland, because they also are in the water, in the sewer system, but they need a lift station just to move it uphill, I guess.
Thanks.
Okay. So as soon as we've got an answer from ODOT, I think it can either move forward or not, depending on what they say. Thanks.
And how do we get the information to you?
You can either let the mayor's office know, or you can let Debbie Walker in the council office know what they say. It'd probably be good to have a letter from them.
Just get it in
Right.
writing.
Yeah, at some point,
Just to put that
yeah,
with
at
the
some point
record.
we will, yes.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay, now we have a question about the road in Shady Lane, which we've heard about before. I don't know if anyone's here to talk with us about Shady Lane or if this is just our conversation. Looks like it may just be us. So there have been a number of meetings that included some folks from the city and from the county and from the township to deal with this issue. And it's essentially there are some homes out there on Shady Lane. The developer who was building the project that corporation went bankrupt. The bank owns the remainder of the land, but there are some homes there. The road is in pretty bad shape, and the homeowners have come to the city, the county, and the township to try to figure out who can help take care of this so that emergency vehicles can make it in and out to their homes if needed.
So was this the young couple that was
Yes.
here? Okay.
Yeah, and we went to some joint meetings with the commissioners, and there've been some field trips. Andy Stone tells us that the rough estimate is that it would cost about $35,000 to fix this and bring it up to township, county standards. That's a little bit over the amount that Bob Eichenberg had recommended. It includes some repairs to the base. What I think we are all talking about is seeing if we can partner to pay to get this up to par and then assess the current owner of the current owners of the property based on road frontage to pay it back. But go ahead and get it done now. So the bank owns the majority of it, the homeowners at the end each own some, and everybody would end up chipping in. So I think no one wants to create a precedent of the city fixing roads outside of the city limits. But there was a bond that was released, and the people who were responsible didn't really follow through, and we're trying to figure out a way to solve this problem and have the homeowners only pay, what's really their share of fixing this. Is that an accurate summary of where we are?
Right, there was, I think, from the original one that was approved, that corporation sold to a second. And that first one had the bond when council approved it. The second one, I have to say, after we were all out of it, never did post a bond. They've got numerous letters both from the city saying they needed to post the bond, but they never did. And there was no real mechanism of enforcement.
Right. And the question from the county is, are we willing to help? And if we're willing to help, how much? Bojinka.
I was going to say, roughly what's the allotment then for the homeowners? I'm curious. What percentage of that, do they pay over time?
Mayor Abel, do you remember
does
how
that
much of
work?
the road frontage is theirs?
I don't remember how much is theirs, but the county, since it would be, or the township, one of the two, would have to go through, if they're really assessing, an assessment process. And the Assessment Equalization Board would establish how much the township and the various property owners would have to pay on the section of the road that is actually receiving the work. The other avenue that was discussed, evidently rejected, was a civil suit from the standpoint of saying, owner of the now defunct development company, it's your responsibility, you have to do it 100%. But that's really, in my mind, the county or the township, one of the other decisions. It's going to be a township road. We're only involved because it's in the 3-mile limit.
But do they decide against a suit? Or you
I
don't
don't
know
know.
that? They could still do it.
Yeah, I was not at the meeting that,
Yeah.
I sent Andy Stone out
Yeah.
to the meeting that actually did the assessment of the road and do that. But I did get a call from the county commissioner's office asking us if we would participate, if so, how much. I said I could not make a commitment. That was a council's decision because it's a policy matter and it's a disbursement of funds they haven't budgeted. So I brought it to you and dumped it in your lap.
Paul?
Debbie?
Yeah.
So we're talking about
I
35,000
can't do it.
total,
Right.
That's
And-
Andy's estimate. Bob Eichenberg's
Yeah,
24.
24.
But
and so what we're talking about is we pick up the entire thing, part of the thing, and get reimbursed from the homeowners for part of the thing.
Property owners.
Property owners, which includes the bank.
Right.
And these,
But I don't think that we were ever talking about all of it.
okay.
Ever talking about getting back all of it?
No.
No,
Spending
spending
all of it.
the
Right.
35,000
Oh,
or
okay.
24, depending what it is.
Right.
Okay. And an assessment board, would that be I know that's done in the city, is that done in a county level too, or a township level?
yeah, it's a state law.
Okay, so would that be their job to do that or ours?
Well, you would do the assessment through the county commissioners would probably do that and pass the enabling legislation, although it might be the townships because it's a township road. The assessment board is really for the appeal by any property owner to it. It only really meets if somebody objects to the assessment that the governmental body has laid upon them, following the state laws. Because in normal state law, intersections are the responsibility of the government. Well, in this case, it's hooking onto an existing shady lane. So is the county going to have to eat some of the cost? Don't know.
Okay, yeah, this is like Kenny Drive.
Right,
That was
like
on
Kenny
many years
Drive,
ago.
where you
Okay.
served on that assessment board.
Okay. Okay, so we'll be putting most of the money forward for the time being, is that it, or just?
Amy?
Your decision.
I guess that's my question too, is what are we being asked? I mean, we're being asked if we want to help with it, but how much, or, I mean,
I think it's up to us.
to say what we want to.
Yeah.
But if we don't, let's say we say
Bojinka.
we want $5,000, who's going to pay the rest? I mean, if it's up to us, who are the other parties?
The county is going to be doing the work.
Okay.
The county engineer's
Regardless.
office has looked at it, county commissioners have talked about it. I think that what has to happen is it gets brought up to standard and gets accepted as a public road, at which point it will become a township road.
So they're going to pay for it?
they're asking for help paying for it.
Right.
Because it's within, sorry.
Carol?
Are you making a suggestion, or will you make a suggestion of what you're thinking that we should do in terms of support? And part of my problem with all of this is if the funds came back in from these other sources, might we end up paying more than anybody else?
How about if we say a portion, and then say
Well,
we'll be
right.
reimbursed by the same portion as the funds come back?
Sounds
And
good.
that they keep, and they do all the public, like intersections or whatever. You know how in the boards are always
Right.
arguing, and so they have to, because it's township, they'll have to do all of the, if they give relief, then the relief.
But I'm assuming that we've got to set an amount. Say, we say, okay, we'll allocate $10,000
That was
for
my
this
number too.
project. Right.
Okay.
So-
Anybody else?
So then the project costs, 35,000. So somebody's got to come up with the 25,000. And what if all these other entities put back in their money and they get all of their money back and we're just out our $10,000? That's what bothers me.
Well, Mary Abel, do you have an idea of
A
how to
magic
structure
answer.
the agreement here?
Well, the structure of the agreement really would be one that, as I think Amy mentioned, that, or and Nancy, that we would be reimbursed from the assessment at a pro rata, I think at 100% is what we're asking for, because it's going to be a township road, and it's a county responsibility. I would want the city to recover all of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That would be the best scenario.
Now, what the commissioners talked about at one point was, and I wasn't at the last one, and I know Debbie was, I think. They talked about potentially adding this to their CDBG formula package as a source of funds to do it, but that would mean they'd have to go through another winter without it, because the CDBG package is put together, just as ours is, in June, July, and is not available to expend until the following year. But that's their decision and their problem. I mean,
Right. Are folks comfortable with bringing forward an ordinance that would offer $10,000 to help get this fixed, with the understanding that either by assessment or by civil litigation, we'll go after getting the money back from the responsible parties? Paul?
Yeah, so really, we're, depending on the range, we're either going to be paying less than a third or less than a half, it sounds like. Okay, I have no problem with
I'd
that.
say up to 10.
Go ahead.
Mary Abel?
what I would suggest, rather than just making it outright 10,000, is say we will pay a percentage of the cost. Because you don't want them to spend your 10,000 first, and if the bids come in at 23,000 or something, well, we'll take 10 of the city and then put 13 with it. So do a percentage of the cost not to exceed $10,000.
Okay.
And that way it's a partnership.
Sounds good.
So-
I saw Bojinka, and then Amy, and then Carol.
Yeah, now, your rest of that, after the money, or we will pursue some legal channel. Now, who would pay the legal fees? I mean, in your phrasing there, I would not want to get stuck with legal fees. So however we can phrase this, so we're not involved in that side of it, I think would be
Say
important.
it's construction costs.
Right, construction costs.
Construction and
Right.
design, something like
Exactly,
that.
exactly.
Limited to
And
those
if
types
there's-
of items.
Yeah, and if there's any litigation pursued, I mean, we don't want to be.
But in a way, property owners aren't paying, you do want your money back. And usually litigation is the only way to get it back, but if it's a pure assessment, then they're going to be putting it on the property tax bills. In their assessment process, they can, in almost all cases, you give
Yes.
the people a time.
Well, can we specify
them.
something about the assessment process with the understanding that the
Why-
funds
why
will
don't
be
we do
recouped
this?
through an assessment process?
Make another suggestion.
Okay.
If the committee would say, this is what we would recommend, then empower myself and Debbie, if she wants to be involved, we'll go to the commissioners and say, this is what council's offering. let's work out details before we go to an actual ordinance. And then if something else pops up,
Right.
we have a way to decide that before we, rather than a total commitment right now. Because they may not do it for another year. They may not do it this summer.
Okay, but this will at least indicate our willingness.
Right.
And give us the basis to be able to hammer out the details?
Yes.
Okay, Amy?
So I was just gonna say then when we'll wait for a final project cost before we decide on the percentage then of what the city's going to do.
I think we could do the percentage and cap it like the mayor said, though. Carol?
My comment was just we need some kind of official agreement
Okay.
that spells these things out.
So we can say 1/3 up to 10,000.
Yeah.
And then the assumption would be if we had to do legal, we could get our lawyers, or county's lawyers, take the case forward, right?
Sounds reasonable? Okay, we're gonna,
We're just doing this because it's a kind thing to do, is that right?
we had a role in this.
Okay.
All of these jurisdictions had a role in it. There was a
Okay.
problem somewhere down the
Okay.
line, and we're gonna try and work together to fix it.
Okay.
So, okay. The next thing on the agenda is a rezoning request on East State Street from an M zone to a B3 zone. Ron McDade's property. Is Mr. McDade here?
Yep.
Gonna come join us? Right. Introduce yourself and give us a quick summary of what you're asking for here.
Okay. I'm Ron McDade. I live at 28A Cook Drive in Athens. And I own a lot across the street from 1100 East State Street in Athens, which is on the south side of East State Street. And the zoning there is manufacturing, M1. And I'm requesting that the lot be rezoned from M1 to a B3. And the reason for that request is that I have an individual that has expressed interest in building a 30 by 90 one-story retail building. And in doing so, it would fit on an M1 zoning, but it would be tight. But the difficulty, as I see it, the parking would be limited in front because of the setback requirements of the M1. And also the building that he's proposing to build would not be in line with the other properties in that area. So I'm suggesting and requesting for council approval to change the zoning from M1 to a B3. And the only benefit that I could see on this would be the setback requirements would be, I'd be able to move the building back closer to the rear property line, which would give parking in front and also have the building lined up along with the other existing buildings in the area. I'll pass along a couple prints that I have. The first one is M1, which shows a proposed building and with the setback requirements. And the second one is a B3, which is setback requirements. And it shows the building being located on the lot on each zoning requirements. I also, at this time, would like to thank council for their approval of the comprehensive plan that they approved on February the 5th. I think this was a very important move on council's part, and I think it was long overdue. And if you would approve the zoning request, it would fit in with the comprehensive plan approval and comprehensive plan recommendations for future zoning requests. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Paul?
It's a very long and narrow lot.
That's correct.
Okay, so you're planning to, is there a footprint on a building on these? Okay.
Yeah, when that gets around to you, Paul, you'll be able to understand why.
Well, you can take a look. I can wait my turn.
The lot is 548-foot frontage. On the west side, it has 90-foot depth, and on the east side, it's only 23-foot depth. So the proposed building site would be on the west side, which would be the greatest depth for the lot. And that would allow plenty of parking both on front as well as to the east side.
And if I'm reading correctly, it's adjacent to, is Casa Lopez also B3?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. And
No, they're in.
That ends?
All that side of the
Still
street
in.
is M, and on the other side of the street is B3.
Okay, okay, I see the arrows there, okay.
I think the comprehensive plan recommends that the zoning be changed from the community center to the parking lot of the bike path, which includes this, to be changed from a manufacturing zone to a B3 zone. So that's basically all I'm trying to do, is jump a gun on that. Hopefully, we can take advantage of the B3 setback, and that's the only reason why I'm here tonight, is the setback requirements.
Okay. Anybody else? Carol?
I certainly feel it's to our advantage to have those businesses lined up on the frontage.
Okay. So people want to go ahead and bring this forward next time? Great. Oh,
Just a
Jim?
question, I agree that
Amy,
having things lined up is good. But also, if the comprehensive plan is speaking about rezoning that whole area, as it probably should be, because there is no manufacturing there, should we be doing an island out there all by itself, or be considering at this time the whole rezoning?
I believe that the Planning Commission did not consider this an island or spot zoning because it is
Because it's
B3 on
across
the
the
other
street.
side of the street, so it's contiguous with B3. And I think that we've kind of been waiting for our planner to help us go through with the larger recommendations of the plan. So hope we can do that. But we are starting to chip away at some of the recommendations in the plan already. There's another item on our agenda tonight that's related.
So, across the street is considered contiguous?
Yes, the zoning line goes, I think, to the middle of the street or wherever.
So it would be, is that, okay.
I think the law directors interpreted that the streets are unzoned, because we had that same issue in determining setbacks before. And also, how do you consider it in how close you are to, like if you're a B next to a R, how do you calculate the feet that are allowed there? Do you say the whole street is which one of the two? Do you split the difference between them, or do you not count it at all? He has ruled that you don't count it at all. And so you take your distance from where that R actually ends in ownership of private individuals, and then go to where that first ownership by the opposite zone is, and that's how you calculate the distance away from a different type of zone in order to do it. That was his ruling about 2 years ago.
Further question.
Jim?
Given the unusual shape of that lot and the narrowness at the east end, it looks as though the proposed business is only going to use a half of the lot, or maybe slightly more. That other is between East State Street and the bike path. At the end of that is a parking area for the bike path.
Right.
Is there any consideration of some easement, some agreement that we might utilize that for? We are planning to cross East State Street in that area somewhere, and that might be valuable at that time.
I'd be very happy to work with council and the city regarding any planning that they might have. I'm somewhat familiar with the extension of the bike path going down to the Holzer Clinic new site. And I live across the street, and we own 6.5 acres or 6.25 acres right across the street. My wife and I are retired, and we're back to Athens, and we'll probably live here the rest of our lives. We're settled in, and as Nancy knows, I'm an old Athenian and my third time back, but I'm here to stay. But we're very flexible on the remaining part of that land, and if we could benefit any future planning, we'd be welcome to do that. We'd be happy to do that. You're welcome.
Thank you. We'll bring this forward at our next regular meeting.
Thank you very much, Debbie.
Thanks. Your plans are there, if you need them.
Mass back? Here you go.
Thank you.
Okay. The next thing on our agenda is this issue of the B2D at the end of Court Street. I was asked to Yeah, the reason that we brought forward the issue about the change in bulk controls regarding the height of the building is that we had a request to rezone that end of Court Street to B2D to match the rest of the uptown area. And as we talked about it, it seemed like we need to pick up that discussion, but so we put this on the agenda, but in further reflection, I'm thinking maybe we should go ahead and get the height requirement passed all the way through and then come back to it. This is another one of those that is in the comprehensive plan, but we do have a public hearing scheduled on the height requirement, and we want to have a lot of time for the other item on our agenda tonight. So I'm suggesting that we may want to talk about this after we get the height requirement taken care of.
So we're gonna send the height requirement change forward.
It's already moving.
It's moving.
Yeah.
When's our, remind me when the public hearing is?
March 19th.
March 19th? Okay.
So it'll be soon, but I don't see the person here who was requesting this, and we want to save plenty of time.
So explain to me again, the public hearing is about the
The bulk
rezoning.
controls.
Okay.
The height.
And the rezoning request, we still have to figure out, the recommendation from the Planning Commission said, council, figure out where you want the line to be. So that's probably a longer discussion than we want to have tonight, so we can get to the other things on our agenda. Okay? So, the summit at Coates Run. There are folks here to talk to us. You can join us at the table here. There's an easel for your phone boards. And one thing I didn't mention to everybody on council, these table mics, you don't want to lay papers down on top of them, or it sounds like thunder at home. That's why I grabbed that one really fast when it landed there. So if we can be careful when we're passing things around.
Is this microphone working?
Is that microphone working? Yes.
Do you think it would be better for me to stand?
Either one, wherever you're more comfortable.
Just don't block. You move down this way.
So we do have a recommendation from the Planning Commission. I have some written communications, so I'd like to go ahead and hear from the developer and then make sure that people are aware of the written communications that I've received, and then we'll open this up for questions and discussion. So,
Hi, I'm Rick Kirk with the Edwards Companies in Columbus. With me tonight is Ryan Pearson from the Edge Group. He's our land planner. Also have with us Dean Wenz, he's the architect of record. We also have Chad Turner, who is our civil engineer, and Chris Schroeds from our office. I'm going to start from the beginning here, and Ryan can help me with some of the boards. I might tell you that we've been at work at this since middle of the summer last year, June 2006. We came before the Planning Commission and got Planning Commission preliminary approval September 7th, 2006. Came forth for a final development plan in February, which is what we're discussing tonight. It was approved at Planning Commission with some recommendations. From the beginning, the site we're talking about is the formerly Ralph Daines property located on Richland Avenue. The location is along Richland Avenue. We have frontage along Richland Avenue and also along Dairy Lane. Our front entrance will be designed to have ingress and egress along Richland Avenue. We have an emergency access that will be gated along Dairy Lane. The site is located in a place next to the Ohio University Inn. We think it's from a planning perspective, it's a appropriate location for multifamily. Across the street is the University Courtyard, and of course the Richland Avenue corridor is where you have existing commercial uses. little bit closer view. Here's an aerial view that shows that the Greenbrier residence that are next door, which is the existing greenscape, and as you can see that the site around is been logged and not a lot of tree growth that's left that's of substance. There is an existing erosion issues, and we think a good location for current development.
I'm sorry, excuse me, can you point on the map to the actual site?
The site frontage on Richland Avenue is, I think, around 300 feet.
Right there, yeah.
It goes up behind this one little commercial piece, up around, and actually there's a little piece of Greenbrier, the Tenolia residence is included. Then it comes down the hill, touches Dairy Lane for a little bit, and follows, there's a small ravine back across the hill. Actually, it's back in here. More like that direction, then it comes up across the Carriage Hill, back down, and then falls coats.
Okay, so it's that whole
Behind the retail, yeah.
tree place there, yeah.
32 point some acres. And I might digress for a second, and I'll just go through this, but we'll go back and answer any questions you may have. I'm just going to try and get the bulk of it. Here are some shots of some of the existing conditions, some views along Richland Avenue. Pardon me, so I can see a little better myself. Up along the top left, behind the McDonald's, coach run images, frontage along Richland Avenue. Some of the areas where we're adjacent to the Ohio University End, we do have some sidewalk and green space. Other areas, there is no streetscape design. This is the proposed plan that we have, multiple building plan. What we've tried to do in our design is to first off think about what we're going to be looking at from Richland Avenue as we come up the hill. We have a 12% grade on the road. We have established a view corridor which will primarily view our clubhouse structure, which I'll show a rendering of in a moment. We have the Dairy Lane access for emergency vehicle uses only. We have courtyard buildings which allow for landscaping and courtyard views. And show you a few other images. These are shots of projects that we have developed previously. Up along the top left is a project we built at Eastern Michigan University. The middle shot here is that same building. We have a 25-foot grade change between the top building and the lower building, and this is an example of how we might handle those kinds of difficult grades. Courtyards that we have at a University of Kentucky site. These are some typical 3 and 4 bedroom layouts. All of the units will be fully furnished. Each person will have their own bathroom and their own closet. Current cable TV and some of the modern conveniences that we have today, security, fire suppression systems. This is our clubhouse area where we have a game room, we have an exercise facility, we'll have a theater. And these are some of the elevations that we have that are particular to the architecture that we had up in Ypsilanti, Michigan, which was next to a train depot historic district. And those are some of the elements we'll try to incorporate into some of the surrounding buildings here. Other images that we have, some of these are projects that we have built. The top left is a project we have in Columbus where we had cleared out an area along the frontage of a street in Columbus called Hayden Run. We donated the ground to the city of Columbus and kept it as a parkland, and then rebuilt the stream corridor. It's a similar concept, an idea that we incorporate here into the Coach Run development. That we had happened to have a horse theme on that particular site. These are some other areas where we've added artwork into our development. The signage that we have out at the farms. This is an area that has in the bottom. Bottom is an image from a project we have in Cincinnati, where we created what we call a sort of a water park theme, and we try to pay particular attention to what our neighbors and the public's going to view when we drive by the site. This is an image from a home in southern United States that has the significant grade change, and the stepping of the landscaping is something that we've tried to apply to our front entrance here in this proposed project. More images of and shots of projects that we built, trying to show the quality with which we develop our projects. We take it very seriously. We also enjoy it. I feel that that's part of the fun of developing, and the signage that we've designed. This is a project we have next to Tuttle Mall in Columbus. We had neighborhood input in that particular site where they wanted to have some retail design in our buildings, so we created a storefront in our buildings, and it's actually a fall storefront in order to comply with those area design requirements. This is another courtyard where we have created a garden area so that the residents can look out on this area with some pleasant images. Lots of landscaping, hardscape here. This was a particular one where we chose to get some street lights from France. I'm stuttering a little bit because I can remember the difficulty with which I rewired those, but from French electric to UL listed America, but it nonetheless goes to show you some of the effort we go to try and do something that's different and appealing and friendly. Site plan that I showed you a minute ago, I spoke specifically about the view from Richland Avenue. From my discussions here with residents and local folks, I'd had some concerns about some of the developments that have occurred along the corridor there, and what we want to try and do is create a front door that will be pleasant for folks to drive by, even if they don't live here. We want to have a finished product that is pleasant and creates a designed view. So this is a rendering that Ryan's put together that shows our front entrance, our sign concept, and how the buildings would look from Richland Avenue, and how it might be stepped up in the grade changes that we'll have. One of the views that we'll see from the Richland Avenue corridor is our clubhouse, and this is a rendering of that facility. We will try and have your eye kind of follow up the landscape and look at this main facility with the cupola. We took a cue from the ridges, where you have some magnificent buildings that have great detail and really stand out in the community. So we want to make a statement that is something that we all can be proud of after the fact. This is an image and a concept that we did. We have discussed that we're going to move a significant amount of dirt on the site here, over 300,000 cubic yards. We have agreement in principle with Ohio University to move the fill over to their site and place it in an engineered capacity. We had offered to provide a concept on how that land might be developed. This is not something that they have formally gone over, but it's just an idea Ryan has laid this out to try and respect the riparian corridors that we have, to respect the open areas, and that's where we would place our fill. Keep the vegetation in the riparian areas. You have an existing stream along the back of our property that he's respected, and so that's part of our concept. Lastly, I'll show you a 3D model that we were asked to do. We know that there's been a lot of discussion about the cuts and fills on the site, and I'll let Ryan walk through this a little bit. We think that we propose that you view this site as this is an appropriate location to develop. You have an existing condition where the site has already been logged. You have existing erosion, and we think that if you're going to try and follow the sensitivity that you all have mentioned about preserving your hillside, I think that there's a balance here in the reality of what we have with our R3 zoning, and if you're going to have some density, this is a good site to have it on. So Ryan has gone through, and this is the perspective that you'd see from Litchfield Avenue, and it gives you an idea that on really how minimal, in our opinion, the change of landscape will be from the Richland Avenue corridor. He can walk through this a little bit better than I can, but in essence, this is a scale drawing of what the cuts and fills will be. The green is the existing. You can see here that we've imposed our buildings, and the substantial part of the hill is going to remain as it is. And the bottom lower left is the image that you saw in a larger view a moment ago, and then this is the existing condition. Ryan, why don't you help me out just a little bit on this?
Essentially what this is it is a 3D model that was taken from the perspective if you were standing just across the street in University Courtyard's driveway. And the blue would represent the existing hillside today. And the yellow, which there's one little spot of yellow, but the green would be the proposed grades. So that as you're standing at Richland Avenue or the University Courtyards, the difference would be over to the south, you would see a little bit of the hilltop being cut down. And then over to the east, or the north, you would actually see more of it, which surprised us because we didn't think you'd see this piece over here at all. And then what we did is we just superimposed the artist rendering on there. And part of it, these buildings, I guess the reason why you see this bigger area here that looks like a big area cut is because it's further back away from the eye, and it actually comes down through the, I guess, it just, the ridge of the hill actually wraps up around to the north. And so that building would actually sit down in to the landscape a little bit better than, I guess, the buildings if they were pushed out front. So it's confusing, and I don't know that it really gets the point across. We don't think that the actual mass of the hillside is going to look that much different.
Bring it a little closer. I think some people are having trouble seeing the difference in
One
the
color
colors
from
at that
another.
distance.
Watch out for the mics, that's all.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
And essentially, if you look at the hillside today, it is covered with some vegetation and some trees. You really can't get a feel of where the ridge actually runs. And essentially it was our little 3D study to see what the difference would be.
And you're back off Richland a little bit. It looks like you're up in the driveway.
Right,
for
we're just
University
sitting in this
Courtyard.
driveway, and it happened to be where our photo was taken, and when the artist did his rendering, he used that for his vantage points.
So actually, I mean, it might be an optical illusion, but the one on the right is existing, and it doesn't look as high as this one.
The one on the right.
The one on my right,
Down here in the bottom?
yeah, does not look, the hill doesn't look as high
As high as
as it
this-
is in this one, as it is even in the bottom one. It's very strange.
Well, I'd have to
Because of
say
the
that it's
trees.
very hard to see. This is set into that exact photo.
Yeah.
It's just
yeah.
very hard to see where the ridge actually is because
Right.
of the vegetation that's on it.
I think
Yeah.
the bottom of this may be here.
Oh, in these upper ones?
Yes.
Probably.
So that's why these
I think
two are
it's
at scale. It's difficult to interpret those. Where this line is, I think that's, if I'm understanding. This line is probably
As I say,
right
this,
here.
This dimension from Richland Avenue to where it looks like the hill would have been.
Right, so Ryan, where would
It's
this
probably
curve
about the
point
same.
is about at that, is that
Right,
hard?
I'm guessing
I don't know.
it's hard to see the darker green.
Okay.
It's probably in and around at that point. We're taking our best stab at
Showing
what
what
you
it would
see.
look like.
Right.
Yeah. I guess a few things that Rick forgot to mention. Through the PUD process, the reason why we're coming in with the PUD process is for the multiple buildings. We do have a section up in the front that's already zoned B3, so it would still retain its B3 underlying zone. Then the R3 would be the back, I think it was 32 acres, and then this was like a 2-acre piece out in front. And then the other thing that we have is we have a section over here that we've labeled as parcel C that we're asking for some conditional uses of the R3 to be permitted, just to see if we can market that to another user. So that, it's really a big what if or a question mark.
Mhm. We have established some buffers in this plan, which are along Coates Run and then also along the back. I might add, with brevity, and I'm happy to add details, that the setbacks and the screening that we have along Greenbrier, we have done a layout and a specific design of where the houses are there and what they'll be looking at. I've met with a couple of residents. Our idea is to provide screening and landscaping along the border there. We have met with the residents over time, gotten some input from folks many months later here. Want you to understand that we look at this from an existing zoning perspective. The compromises we made from our possible zoning of about, the allowed density that we could use under the R3 is 940 units. We're asking for 257. We know that there's been some question about the density.
You're asking for how many?
257
units,
Which is how
900
many beds?
878 beds.
We're allowed to put in 940 units, which would be 3,000 and some beds. We've been in touch with Ohio University in terms of their occupancy, existing conditions here. We think that it's appropriate, and there's a need for some improved housing conditions. We think that we provide a solid opportunity here for residents to have a better housing choice. We'd ask that we're here to answer any questions you may have. We have an immense amount of detail on engineering, storm water, sanitary. We've met with Burgess and Nyepel, had a preliminary review of our plans. Architecture is well along. We've reviewed with the state reviewing agencies. Dean is well versed in that. We have handicap issues that we've addressed. We feel that we're well along the way here and nearly complete with the design of the project. Truthfully, what we want to do is come forth to you folks and bring this before a vote. We want to remain optimistic that we can work with you, but the realities of our timeline, we are going to shoot for a 2008 fall opening. It'll take us 14 months to build. It'll take us 2 months to do the dirt work, and then to proceed with the approvals through the governmental agencies. We need to begin and have a direction here pretty quick.
I want to mention a couple of communications I've received and open it up to questions, and then we'll have discussion. I'm sure there are citizens here to talk to us. I received an email today from Muriel Grimm on behalf of the Southside Community Association. She's not able to be here tonight. I had email program problems today, so I did ask Debbie to go ahead and print this out for everybody, so you should have that. we also received in our boxes a letter from the OU Student Environmental Group, Student Sierra Coalition, and OU Environs expressing their concerns. And when I was getting everything out to come here, I did actually find a letter from the Athens Shade Tree Commission from a different iteration of this project about a year ago that makes me want to talk to them and see if they have an opinion about this version. So we have those. I think we should start just with questions about the project and then get more into discussion. So Bojinka, it looked like you had something.
Oh, I just had a question about the additional use for that you mentioned, that you were looking for other users. Do you have any thoughts about what kind of users you're looking for? Do you have some criteria?
The conditional uses that we're asking to be permitted are motels, residential, healthcare facilities, health clinics, private club, convenience business or service establishments.
It's up at the top of the hill also, right?
It would
Oh,
be
it's on
more
the
of a
side of the hill.
midway,
Yeah,
right, it would
okay.
be midway down the hill. And
Okay.
Are you asking for that approval now, for kind of a blanket approval of a conditional use? And did you ask the planning commission for that?
Yes, it's been part of our submittal the whole time, and I guess the idea that we had in our packet is it would have to go through an architectural review committee, but we are asking for the uses to be permitted just to market it to see if it has any other value.
I don't recall hearing that discussion at the planning commission level, and maybe I wasn't there when you talked
It
about it.
was early on, and then it was not an immediate use as we were in the mid-range and toward the end. But it's following the R3 guidelines. It's what is a conditionally permitted use. And the real question is, if we're going with the PUD, then it has to be included within the PUD. If they're going just through straight zoning, it's done by the zoning board. And what they're in essence saying is should the PUD, really, those two areas are sort of carved out that are not in the PUD in some ways, because the land's obviously being changed some degree, but from a zoning, the underlying zoning is still B3. There's no specific proposal on that. I would think that if a specific use came about, it would then be a modification to the PUD and would be treated as an amendment to it and would follow that process, because at the time of approval, we had no definite, because there was no definite of these particular uses that would be there. So that, to me, I think I would interpret it as a change to the PUD. But
Which would come back through the planning commission?
So,
Yeah.
in that case, the B3 out in front could be left as B3, and we could do a PUD overlay on the R3 piece alone.
you'd probably, might have to subdivide to do that. I'd have to check, because that I don't believe ever came up during the discussions.
I haven't heard
But there's
anything
the
about
two
it yet.
ways of
So-
it.
I mean, in that case, it would make more sense for the developer to just stay with his straight B3 zoning and be assured that he could do something on that piece of ground. I would imagine, instead of getting the PUD overlay, it would just,
Usually when the PUD
Complicated.
comes in, it has all of the buildings that are going to be built on it.
Yeah.
And then if buildings are added, then we treat it as a revision. And the planning commission has to decide if that's a minor revision or a major revision. And usually if it's extra buildings, just that building, everything else stays as it is. But just that building then goes through and gets the same process that the original PUD did. Only it's limited to that structure and that area of land that it's on.
okay.
Nothing goes away.
I have a question. In looking at this whole packet of material that was brought up to the council office with the recommendation, it looks to me like there are things in here that, well, there are two different plans in here, and there's the development agreement, which did not pass. Like, there's material in this packet that isn't really part of what the planning commission is recommending to us. And I'm unclear, because there are both of the projects with the there are two different layouts of the buildings, two different water lines, and where the connector roads off the property are. I think that we should have one recommendation of the plan that you're seeking approval for.
Yes.
So,
And what that is this first packet that is a huge book was the required submittal information. And while we were talking about it, any changes that would happen to that we talked about just bringing in updated supplemental information that would be an amendment to the original booklet, so that this would be the most current information. Whatever change would be in this most current packet, just to save from reprinting and bringing in a new big book every time.
okay.
So that the site plan that was voted on that night and the information, the data matrix that spells out the density, the number of beds, the current information is in this little
The developer went over that
supplemental packet.
because the water line was a change because there was no development agreement. So it's
And that's
more
spelled out in this
beneficial to
booklet.
that to build a pump house. And that tower you saw on Richland at the bottom was the camouflage of the pump house, for example.
So then, members of council, we have one copy of this. It's been on the table up there. There's a rendering or drawing of the site plan. There was another copy of this, and the government channel, I think, was going to shoot that to be able to show it on television, so I don't see it back with our pile of stuff. But this is the old layout, and then there's another image, which is the new one, which you have up there.
There were some requests in a meeting I attended with the developer and the university where if they wanted to straighten out that middle lane there, so to speak, so that they in essence had a straight drive, not weaving through buildings. So that moved a couple buildings.
Right, that, and we pulled them
about
off
the
the
last
property
couple
line.
weeks before the planning commission got it. And so that is why that rendering is now.
Right, we made a few changes from the original booklet.
You want to bring that over here and just show people what the changes are, since they've seen it?
The original booklet, it actually had the two buildings that were up by the Greenbrier residence turned 90 degrees, which pushed them out into, they were very close to these property lines, so we turned those 90 degrees to try to pull it down. The three buildings along the south property line were slid this direction, which gave us a little bit more room off the property line down here, which we were trying to meet that 40-foot setback as much as we could, and I think we ended up at 33 feet off the property line at this little piece where it comes back. And in doing that change, it actually allowed us to provide a more direct access or connectivity to whatever would happen over here in the south in the future. And then there were a few notes that were cleared up. I think we had that the existing evergreens along the Greenbrier residence were Norway spruce. There are actually a lot of white pines up on top of the hill. I really don't remember exactly what else was changed at that time. In this packet, though, it spelled out everything that actually changed on the site plan. And then we tried to highlight in red any numbers that changed in that development matrix.
Amy?
The parking is still the same, is that correct? I see where you've just swung that one building, but the parking is still the same.
Right, the parking is still the same. I mean, this parking used to come up, I think
Right.
this building pulled back, and it actually gave it a lot better convenience to the front doors of these buildings.
Yeah, it looks.
A little bit better fire access.
I was going to say, you mentioned themes in various properties, like the horses and these other things. Do you have a theme for this one?
Right now, the thing that we're playing off, the public art that we are trying to
Yeah,
pull off is the terracing that you saw in that one image of Middleton Place.
yeah.
Because we have the hillside, we're trying to get an artistic version of doing some terracing down the hillside that
Okay.
helps set that clubhouse up on a pedestal.
But there's no other art, kind of, like one
Not
time you
currently.
showed us
I mean, we-
pictures of horses in the meadow, like,
We did,
Statues
and
with
we've
horses in
had
the
some
middle.
ideas about some
Bobcats.
reconstruction of,
yeah,
you
bobcats.
know, of the Indian Mound, and it was suggested a while ago that maybe we reconstruct that and make that part of a project with some university students, which I was open to and am.
Then like a month later, it was, I wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
It might offend some of the Native Americans if
You
you
know,
try to.
that whole landscape corridor was, yeah.
I received a call, another communication tape, a phone call from Paige Alost at the Convention and Visitors Bureau. She's heard from citizens who are concerned about the mounds, and they are very interested in looking at heritage tourism and what we can do in the region to promote heritage tourism. So it might be useful to, talk to Paige and see what ideas she has and how she would recommend treating that.
Well, the idea of the terracing came from the existing landscape architecture that you have here in town, and we actually looked at the waves that, I guess Smile Inn had done, and thought we might be able to do our own version of that, and we ended up with this, which is our iteration of trying to
You're right. I
have.
was trying to hint at the mound builders, but in a more abstract, artistic way, and not try to, get into the heritage and replicating something.
Right. Jim?
Another subject. You showed us several images of streams in properties and bordering properties, and you mentioned Coates Run a couple times. Your property does abut. The proposed development right now is not adjacent to Coates Run, but there's certainly going to be some impact. What plans do you have for Coates Run as it borders your property?
Behind the commercial?
Well, we're
Behind that proposed, yes, which is behind the proposed.
Right, if you're cutting the
Yeah.
major extent of Coates Run, right now, we are trying to hold a 50-foot buffer or riparian corridor and keep all existing vegetation. It's a no disturb zone that our grading would stop before it hits that 50-foot line. So we can put up our silt fence and try to use as much natural vegetation to filter it as we can. So that would run the full extent. Then the one little piece where we are going to have our crossing, the idea there is it would be a con-span structure that would actually cross the creek, that would get us our 3 lanes of vehicular that we need the turn lane to go north on Richland and some sidewalk. And actually during that process, this section of the stream will be impacted. And the idea right now is to straighten it out to go through our con-span and get a little more room down here and actually get what we think would be a better situation and get a little more storage on this side of the bridge, and then clean out that bridge and try to get to where water could actually pass under it better.
Down here at the bottom, this is the creek that we reworked up in Columbus, and you can see some of the, when it's grown a little higher. But down here at the bottom, we have some existing, some sandstone that we have that would be an edge that we would put along that front as the bridge crossing the river there. That would be how our design concept would go forward in that area.
Depending upon the classification of the stream, it has to go through a process with EPA and potentially the Corps of Engineers to approve whatever they're doing in any relocation of the stream bed and the bridge over the stream bed. So there is a whole array of other non-city approvals that EPA and Corps of Engineers that have to go through for that section of it.
Are we about 400 feet of impact or 200 feet on site?
Coates Run is a perennial stream, so we're allowed to affect up to 200 feet of that. That's an EPA rule. And we're staying under, that's including the culvert and whatever, wing walls and regrading around there. So, yeah.
I mean, the remainder of the Coates Run, if you look at some of these photos, you can see on our side of the creek, it's pretty steep over there. There's even some sheer rock walls as it goes up. And once you get beyond this point, it still remains fairly steep up through that 50-foot buffer. So,
Paul?
So parcel C, which is 5.58 acres, how do you visualize people, and you're talking about using it for as possible commercial, how do you visualize people getting in and out of that if you've got Coates Run on one side, your line of trees on the other side, and trying to create a riparian area?
Right now, all the discussion, and we really haven't even looked at how this thing would lay out or what would go on it, because we don't know if there's any potential for a user. But the idea would be that off of the entrance drive coming up the hill, a road or an entry drive would come into this section down here, and it would actually be a little bit lower. It's probably more like a 40-foot difference from our parking lot levels and our finished floors.
Do you have any maps showing, I thought some of that Richland Avenue was a floodway, flash floodway of some kind. Do you have any borderlines or knowledge of that?
The only information I've seen is floodplain and floodway diagrams. And like I mentioned, that on our side of Coates Run, it gets really steep. All the floodplain actually went out over, and this is the western edge of the floodplain and floodway, where it didn't really affect our site until it got down to that bottom area.
So
that
pretty much
engineering was
floods
un-
in the street.
What?
It floods in the street.
Right.
Yes, I know.
But Chad, I believe that we're well along with that process. We've hired Doyle Hartman. Chad, could you help me with any of that?
Yeah, it's
Could you
Come up
come
here
up to
so
it? Come on up.
people can hear you who are watching at home.
Yeah, we've hired, well, to begin with, I'm Chad Turner, I'm with Bird and Bull Engineers in Columbus. We've subcontracted Doyle Hartman, who's with Hartman Engineering up in Delaware. He is running through a floodplain analysis for us. Basically, there had been a previous one done for this site. He's taken that and is making sure he agrees with it and modifying it to our site. But yes, the floodplain's exactly how Ryan was saying. The steepness of, as you come up the hillside, you almost immediately get out of it. It is Richland Avenue is pretty much all within it across our frontage and that little corridor across there. So any kind of development, in this area we're talking about right now would be out of it.
And the other thought is that with our storm management system on site, it should help alleviate it somewhat. I don't think it's going to fix all the problems.
Behind the 50-foot buffer, on this side of it, are there a lot of trees that are being removed there?
Back through this section,
Right.
uh,
Are there existing trees that are going away?
there are existing trees. I mean, there are existing trees along the site. Once you get into the site, and I mean, if you go out and look at it with a little snow on the ground,
Right.
you can see how thin it gets up into the top of the hill here. The majority of the good quality trees that we feel that are worth saving and that we can save are along the property lines as much as possible, and really the streams is where we paid as much attention as we could.
Okay, my question has nothing to do with the trees. It has to do with runoff because those trees are removed. What's our situation with runoff that direction towards Coates Run?
But, Ryan, we actually met with Bill Garrett at Burgess and Eichel, and we've run through the calculations. And as you run through the stormwater detention calculations, technically, it kind of depends, and we'll be working with Bill on this. But those trees and those woods are so clear and open that by the time we get in there and plant grasses and stuff, there could possibly be, according to the calculations, less runoff coming down into the creek.
Jim?
When you were back here, you mentioned your stormwater detention plan, and I don't see that on anything. There's no ponds that are showing up. No,
Right.
up here on the whole site, what are you doing with the water?
Up top.
Yeah, the water hits the impervious surface, hits the storm inlets, and then it would come down into these dry basins, which we have two located at the lowest points of the site. And Carol, this would help with filtering some of that water, or answer part of your concern. Now on this side over here, we don't have a swale or anything along the bottom that would actually direct it to this pond before it hit the creek. However, anything off the pavement or buildings or anything up in the top would hit the storm system and actually go into the pond, hold for 24 hours. A certain
For water
percentage.
quality requirements. Part of our meeting with Bill Garrett at Burgess and Eichel too is the whole site's going to be graded, so if the storm system is overcapacitated, that you get the higher, or the bigger size storms, 50, 100-year storms, they will flood route to those dry basins. They won't just be able to spill out over the parking lots and run down in the Coates Run and the ravine on the other side. So that's part of a meeting we had with Bill Garrett. That was, something we discussed quite a bit.
But the only storm water, unless it's a really bad situation, the only storm water that would hit the creeks would be running off of turf, which generally has a better...
And again, we'd argue that we're almost improving that condition along there compared to the open log forest where it's able to just, the grass will prevent the run, decrease the runoff compared to the...
I can see that on this side. That side is,
On this side?
more my concern.
Well, like I said, anything that's picked up in the parking lot that has the oils and the contaminants in it would hit the filtration pond before it...
But the erosion on the way down is part of what
During construction or post-construction?
Both.
I think post-construction, this will be a lot better situation than you have on the hillside today. I mean, if you go out there on the ground plane at the actual soil, it's almost denuded of vegetation just because of the shade levels and the canopy above. And there's a lot of paths and things more.
Are you planning any bus service? You are.
Right now, the discussions have been, and since the water line isn't continuing to the south, we would have to have a booster pump somewhere down around the Coates Run area.
I said bus.
Right.
Oh, yeah, okay.
During that, we would have a booster pump house.
Yeah.
It would also have a bus stop component in it, as well as the sign that I think you probably saw in the artist rendering. That would be at the bottom of the hill to help with getting people down to the bottom to use the commercial sites if they want to use the bus system. Then at the top of the hill, at our little mail kiosk, there's a little bus stop bench, and that's kind of a place where people can congregate. And there's a lot of times an informational kiosk that people can...
Is that basically your bus system, or is that tied into
They're
the
proposing
city?
a contract with the city.
Okay.
Other questions? Paul?
I remember having a discussion with you, Mr. Kirk, about the need for the university housing. I think you're looking at the housing master plan for the university, saying 1,900 beds necessary. And I'm aware of the fact that they haven't made enrollment and they're having retention problems. So is this actually viable or necessary?
I'm aware that they're off 400 beds, 400 students from 100 students from freshmen, 200 from transfers, and 100 from graduation. And the transfers and the retention has a direct relation to the upperclassmen who need some opportunities for improved housing. So yes.
Bojinka?
I have one more. In the photos of the developments, like in Ypsilanti, et cetera, the places looked pretty bare. I mean, in all these renderings, there are lots of beautiful trees of a fairly substantial size. Is there any way to assure, and this is really a question for others, planting of a certain number and size of tree? Because your other developments did not look very tree heavy. Basically, they look pretty bare.
I can offer my opinion from a landscape standpoint. I feel that we start out with a very small plant, and it takes a while for that thing to grow, whereas architecture, as soon as the project's finished, it's...
I know, and so the pictures that we see are basically, 15 to 20 years in the future after the trees have grown.
Right.
And I think that that's something to consider, that, there might be some need to look at planting bigger trees.
Have requirements about, what is it, diameter,
Caliber.
breast height, the caliper requirements for trees that are planted that should, mean that we're talking about the older, bigger trees going in initially in projects. Paul?
But at the same time, and this is my short stint on the tree commission, is that trying to plant larger trees and older trees, it's more difficult. They don't take well.
Oh, I know.
Okay.
Oh, I know, I'm not
I
saying,
know,
50-foot trees, but I'm saying that the pictures that I saw did
And our
not.
experience has been, even if you plant a 4-inch caliber tree instead of a 2.5, in approximately 5 years, the 2.5-inch tree actually starts throwing roots and growing a lot faster than that 4-inch, and it'll catch up to it and sometimes surpass it, because the bigger trees, they just get shocked a lot more when they get done.
Right. Yeah, but the reality is that we're looking at a 30-year-old development.
Right, and
Yeah.
that's part of the development.
Yeah.
Amy?
I just had a question. In terms of traffic, as I've expressed concern about increased traffic on Richland Avenue, do you know if this location is within the distance to have a commuter pass to the university? I know when I lived on Richland Avenue that it was, but I don't know how far down it goes, in terms of how many cars will be traveling in and out of that complex.
Our plan is to provide bus service.
Sure,
for
I
everyone.
understand that. But if somebody wants to get up and go when they
Their,
want to go.
their University Courtyard is not in the commuter pass, this is directly across the street. I think the cutoff is Hooper Street in Carriage Hill.
Thank you.
Jim?
The plan is shown, back to Virginia's question, does that conform with the tree commission's requirements about placement of trees in parking lots, et cetera?
We are asking for a departure from that in the fact that they have a 10-space, consecutive 10-space requirement before an island. However, there are certain situations where if you had 12 spaces, from an architectural standpoint and breaking up parking lots, it just makes a lot of sense, and it really isn't going to feel that much different once you're in the site. So
Are
we are
those-
asking for us.
Are those 12 spaces between trees?
I
or-
think I might have 12 in this situation, and then there are a few others. I think the maximum that I had, and I know I wrote it down on the development matrix, that 15 spaces would be the maximum, and that only happened in one spot.
Carol?
Is the total number of islands, have you?
Yeah, I did my calculations on the island to parking coverage,
Right.
whatever you call that, and we were well under the. I guess we were in compliance.
From
by quite a while.
from
Quite a
that
ways.
standpoint,
Right.
although sometimes it varies how many spaces are between them.
Right, that was the only one that we didn't comply with.
Got it.
And during the PUD process, we were asking to have that waived.
Have the Tree Commission and the Disabilities Commission reviewed the things that our process says they're supposed to review and given their input?
No, the Tree Commission did put out a letter early on when we submitted our first packet, and we haven't met with them yet. We were hoping to get a little further down the line here and see if we had any support for the project before we went in and started doing a lot of landscape plans.
I think that our process requires that they have some input before the project is approved. I think
It
that's,
is.
yeah.
That's right, before it's approved.
So-
We'll happily meet with the tree commission, and
Sure.
I'll tell you that we have never built a development that doesn't vastly exceed
I feel
landscape
confident
requirements.
We will comply with the Tree Commission.
Please, they have a meeting Thursday.
And the Disabilities Commission has a meeting tomorrow, but I know they're planning to give someone an award. I don't know how much time they have on their agenda.
We met with the Disabilities Commission on the previous project, and Dean's well-versed in the requirements there, and so we're prepared and understand the needs, and we'll comply. We just, we need to get an approval here. We're happy to move forward with some of those contingencies before we spend too much more energy on those issues.
Right. I mean, I think that generally those things are supposed to happen before final approval by the Planning Commission. I think that's in the list of the final application. But I don't have the subdivision regs in front of me, so
If that's
I don't
all
think
that
it
we
is,
have,
and
then
I talked to Mr., is it Ignish?
Or Ingram?
Ingram.
Oh, the tree commission.
Right, and he said that he was okay with waiting until we got a little further along with council. He said that it's actually during the council process that we need to have that figured out before the plan is approved.
Okay.
So,
Other questions?
One last question,
Yeah.
for me anyway. There was a fairly detailed development agreement proposed, and then we didn't pass that. I think part of that was talking about the developer's desire to cooperate with us if we develop a TIF in this area. Are you still willing to cooperate with that TIFing process?
Well, we don't have an off-site water line anymore, which is part of that was the reason for the TIF. So.
Well, we had talked about a TIF to
For Richland Avenue.
to improve Richland Avenue as part of this development going on.
Sure, we're going to be
If that
generating.
discussion-
You're going to be getting lots of tax dollars here, but we're happy to do that. If
Well,
that's,
it'd be nothing would help the project as well as the city.
Absolutely.
As far as the front door. So, yeah,
we're absolutely
I
open.
wouldn't see why we-
Thank you.
Debbie?
Paul?
So you don't think topography is substantially changed by your earth moving?
Oh, it's substantially changed.
So
We're just
that's-
talking about the view corridor in terms of, there's been discussions about how much cut, and so we did that model to try and illustrate what you would see from a scale perspective. But we're moving lots of dirt, yes.
So do you need a variance from, what is it, Title 27? The topography changes and all that stuff that was adopted?
Don't know. That's a generic, I've read it several times. It talks about slope stability, and it has, I've heard different opinions on that.
Mm-hmm. And where the dirt gets moved, the topography changes on that, does that need variance as well?
Don't know.
Okay.
Do we need to ask the law director to look at Title 27 or go back to the planning commission and ask that question?
It's your committee.
Well, I'm asking for
Could be nice.
people's opinions
Yeah.
about how to proceed with that. It's definitely a question that's been raised by a lot of citizens on the south side.
And not just on this,
Right.
in general.
Well, you have an existing code here in Athens about stability in the soil, so we're most concerned about putting buildings on stable ground, and we're pursuing that from a safety standpoint, and you have engineers that you have to work through, that you hired to review that. So that's our focal point.
Right. And you have been talking with Burgess and Nyepel. Do we have a statement from Burgess and Nyepel about their review of the engineering?
Yes, you
been
do.
done?
And we
That's
comply
in
with Title 27
This,
interview.
that's in, we have a letter from Burgess and Nyepel somewhere in.
I don't believe it's in that package.
No, I think it was delivered to the planning commission the day of the meeting.
Okay, so we need to get
Yeah,
that.
there were still details to work out, but it was a standard thing that, you know, you do the final plan usually, but when Bill Garrett, in essence, from his engineering standpoint, says he's far enough along with those engineers that it will comply, but there's still probably work to be done in final site grading plans and other things that you aren't going to go spend the dollars if it isn't going to get approved.
Right, right, but we do have something. for
But you
Burgess
have
and-
that condition in what you're doing too, same as the planning commission always puts that condition within any approval, that it is subject to final approval by Burgess and Nyepel for state, so the issues in Title 27.
Other questions?
As a member of the committee, I would say we might ask the law, I would like to ask the law director for his interpretation of how Title 27 should be interpreted.
Right. What I'm kind of marking the things that I'm seeing that I think we need. The Tree Commission and Disabilities Commission input, some opinion from the law director about whether there needs to be a variance from Title 27. I have a question about this. this issue of a blanket approval for conditional uses in a PUD for something that we haven't seen any drawings or a specific proposal for. I'm not quite sure where to go with that. Those are the issues I see right now. I know there are other people here in the community who probably have some questions and want to talk to us as well. I'd like to, welcome people who are here who would like to talk to us to either find a seat at the table or come up to the podium. Looks like Chris. Welcome.
Thank you. Chris Nisley. And you have the information that Muriel Grimm submitted on behalf of the Southside Community Association, so I won't take your time to go through all the details of that. But I will just highlight for the public record that what it does is summarizes the results of a survey that was distributed. And you might note that that there were 24 respondents. It was done in a brief period of time in January, but that all of the respondents' concerns really relate to the size of the building. And so I'd like to reiterate that. You also have the concerns stated by the officers of the Southside Community Association, the environmental issues, the safety, the traffic issues, the image that will be affected by such a large development. I think what I might just highlight is what stands out to me most personally is that I do think that the current design for the 800 plus beds and the necessary removal of the 300,000 cubic yards of dirt violates the intent of Title 27. So I'm very glad to hear that you'll be looking to the law director for some information about that. I do have a question, and this relates to the mounds, and maybe you can help me with this, Mr. Kirk. Mention was made earlier of contact from the Tourism Bureau about the mounds. And is it my understanding that one of the buildings that is currently planned will go on top of the mound, or at the site where the mound is, or will the mound be preserved, is my question.
Which mound?
The earlier design, I think when you reviewed it with the Planning Commission, it was stated that there is a building on the mound.
That's right. The remnants of a burial mound happen approximately in this area. And currently there is a building on top of that, and that grade will no longer be exactly where the bottom of the remnants are. It will be depressed. It will not look like it does today.
Okay. It just doesn't make sense to me if you're going to bring tourism in. If you bring them in to see a mountain and you've removed the mountain, it doesn't make sense that that would be a tourist attraction. And just I'm saying that as a consideration. If it's being looked at as a plus, as a draw for tourism, I would disagree, unless some kind of modification of the plan would be made on the location of that building. Thank you for your time.
Do members of council have any questions for Chris? Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Anybody else?
I need to state my name.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I'm Delia Rapp, I'm the president of Southside Neighborhood Association. And I just, as you all know, the Southside has big problems with the potential traffic problems, and we really don't want to see that kind of removal of the hilltop and the rearrangement and the displacement of Greenbrier. However, I want to cite this example, and I don't know whether this is appropriate at this time or not, but in the midst of the conversations for the development agreement, Mr. Kirk and I were leaving this building, although I was in a conversation with two other people, and he kind of interrupted it, and I was kind of blunt, and it became very hot. But the example here is, at one point in the midst of our discussion, I pointed out to him that I had heard that he had plans to develop a commercial entity, or Tom Dowdy would come in to develop a commercial portion of this property at a later time. And Mr. Kirk flat out denied it and said, who told you? If you're going to listen to hearsay, then you call me and ask me first. So this may be the example of what you're looking at. There's a lot of, there's possibly facts, and then there's the things that are maybe disguised. That's all I have to say.
Questions for Delia? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else wishing to speak to us? Greg?
I'll try to keep cool as I can. But what gives the right for white people to build on sacred ground? If this was a frontier cemetery there, would you put a development there? One of the mounds at this site, which was partially excavated, produced from the partial excavation, which was put back. It wasn't completely destroyed, okay. An ear of maize, which is over 3,500 years old, was taken out of there.
Oh, what?
An ear of maize,
Ear maize.
3,500 years old,
Oh.
of which has not been found in any other mound site in the Ohio Valley. My reference for that is the archaeological history of the Hocking Valley. I myself am a descendant of the original peoples of Ohio. And I take it personally, especially when I look at the history of how the desecrations have occurred here in the Ohio Valley. It's unbelievable. I mean, we're talking about heritage tourism here. You're coming along a little late. Let's have no net loss of cultural resources, starting now. As per the comprehensive plan, which has been passed, and congratulations on that. You know, no more net losses of cultural resources, no matter what the reason. There's no excuse. Thank you.
Did anybody have questions? Okay.
Actually, I have a question. Sorry.
Greg, for Greg?
Well, maybe.
For Dick has a question for you.
Well, I mean, I guess I have a question in general.
You can ask me questions.
Because frankly, I'm not as familiar with, this area. But I know in the West, there are, I guess, some kind of protections of these places.
If there's any federal funding in this project whatsoever, it comes under the auspices of NAGBRA, which is the Native American Grave and Burials Act. Any persons that have any association with that can take claim to that for protection. I can't claim that because I don't have a BIA card. That's just the way it is, But still, if you look back in the history of Athens County, there were projects that took place which were protected by, people who were amateurs, so to speak, amateur archaeologists, but really were preservationists, even as early as the late 1800s. If one looks into the Smithsonian surveys of the Ohio Valley, interestingly enough, one of the major sites in that is now university estates, desecrated. And I produced those documents, by the way, a number of years ago to the developers, with all the maps, with all the history, and it just adds to the whole thing. It's like we have this ongoing disregard, disrespect. And I really feel like, as our comprehensive plan states, and by the way, you already know this, when you pass the comprehensive plan, it made all other legislation null and void if it doesn't comply. And I don't care what the...
That's not
Well, anything that has to do with zoning and planning law.
What that statement did was remove references to previous versions of the comprehensive plan, so it
Okay,
didn't like repeal
my
the whole body of
misunderstanding.
law.
Yeah, okay, but I'm just saying that it does, I mean, I have excerpts from, you know, you have your comprehensive plan, I don't need your job, but there's section I, history and culture, talks about it, tourism, and under section 4, under that, section I, heritage, ecotourism, under I, history, culture, and image, it all talks about this. Celebrations, history, and culture. We should be having the Indian Mound Festival in collaboration with the Plains. That's how significant the site is. People don't realize there was a mound located at the site of the Hungry Howie's at one time. But the Planning Commission at that time allowed a development to go through which destroyed the mounds there, and the university before that. Union Street, the cemetery at Union Street in Schaefer, underneath the building there, that's a mound site. You can see it's huge. There's a large building on top of it. A part of the thing that the comprehensive plan states is that we should do a historic inventory. And part of that historic inventory is an assessment is to preclude these kind of developments which aren't taking the comprehensive plan into consideration. We need to move forward here. And, you know, I have my personal feeling about that, but, you know, as far as where the city is in its comprehensive plan, it's the responsibility of this body to take the leadership. So, any other questions? If you have any, I can get information to you having to do with archaeological resources in the Hocking Valley. I worked in culture resources for years, National Park Service, a number of other things. Anybody else have any questions?
Debbie?
Paul?
Would you consider the leveling of an Indian mound changing the topography?
Not acceptable. It's desecration. That's just, you can do that in a shopping mall, you know. I mean, there was an original plan here at one time, as I remember, even in the FAR project for sidestepping those sites. And they can't make a mistake. I know where they are. I've got them on air photo maps from before the reforestation from the early 1900s. So, you know, I know where they are. I got a GPS on them too. So, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. It's time for us to have a discussion, I think, about where we go next. Oh, Tom.
Thank you. Tom McGuire, 3073 Glacier Road, Guysville, on behalf of Milestone Development, a now minority partner in the proposal. Reference has been made to the Indian Mound and whether or not this development would constitute the destruction of a historical site. In Section 1A of the comprehensive plan recently passed by Council, it talks about the vision set forth in there, and it talked about preserving or embraces the importance of stable and appealing neighborhoods, preserved historical sites. Now, I've been to the Indian Mound, and I took Ms. Phillips there on a tour, and I'd be willing to take any other member of council that wants to go up on the hill. That is not a preserved historical site. And I mean no disrespect to whoever built it. It was excavated at least 30 years ago. It has mature trees growing on it. It is not a preserved historical site. No disrespect to the people that would like to preserve it. With respect to tourism, I don't know of any proposal that has been advanced to actually engage in tourism with respect to that particular mound. And I offer that just for your information. The comprehensive plan talks about balancing needs. There is no ruling in or ruling out of particular developments, as I understand the comprehensive plan. It talks about protected views balanced with the need for employment opportunities and economic development. The comprehensive plan doesn't state a preference one over the other. It requires a balance. It also encourages the Athens community to embrace mixed use and higher density development concepts. That's under Article B, subsection 5, under mixed use and mixed density. It goes on to say that the areas around downtown should be focal points for redevelopment, representing great opportunities to develop dynamic and vibrant urban environments with greater density and mixtures of uses. And I do agree, I congratulate you for passing the comprehensive plan. I think it presents a roadmap and states the council's vision for the city, and it requires a balanced approach. The university has announced publicly that it plans to grow. The city, it seems to me, that frames the discussion that city council should make and the decisions that it should engage in. And to us, the overall issue is how best to meet the city's needs, including growth in a high university enrollment. They may not have made it there yet. There have been some unexpected shortfalls in retention and such things. But what's the city going to do? What is the university going to do if when they get to their 1,500 student planned growth, there isn't any place for them to live? They will not be able to attract them here to Athens. And what does that mean in terms of cutbacks in university employment and the payroll taxes that are paid to the city and the spending that those now non-existent employees are not going to be making? Those are all factors that I believe that City Council should take into consideration. The alternatives to a high-density, high-quality construction are also set forth in the comprehensive plan. And the discouragement of neighborhood conversions is included in the comprehensive plan. Fortunately, there has been a net reduction in conversions, according to the most recent press report. My assumption is that developers are waiting to see, including individual homeowners, are waiting to see what the city is going to do with high-density development proposals before deciding whether or not to invest smaller amounts of money in their properties. If the university's number is accurate and it plans to grow by 1,500 students, the only other project that's pretty far along in the approval process is Landmark. And if Summit at Coach Run is not approved, there will be a shortfall of approximately 1,270 beds to meet that 1,500 student increase goal. If the alternative is scattered site units, smaller construction scattered around the city, I just took an average that if each smaller site construction averaged 24 beds, that would be 12 two-bedroom apartments or 8 three-bedrooms apartments, just as an average. It would take 53 such buildings to make up for the shortfall not filled by Summit at Coates Run. In addition, the City Council has the highest degree of control over high-density planned urban development constructions. You can set the development agreement, you can set the parameters, you can address concerns related to the related commercial development. Scattered site units that meet the city zoning code, you have very little control over. You have little control over where they go, as long as they're consistent with the zoning code. There isn't any councilmatic decision that would be acquired unless a variance was requested. Neighborhood conversions, it's my understanding that you have no control over those. So a high-density quality construction gives the City Council the highest degree of control over its parameters. And I encourage you to approve this one. I was present at the Planning Commission when the survey results were announced. It appears from what was presented tonight that one more survey result came in since the 23 were described at the Planning Commission. There were over 350 circulated, according to the report, and there were 23 responses at that time, now 24. One of the indications was that one of the options that people could express a concern about was the size of the project. And it's my clear recollection that only one survey respondent indicated that size was an issue for them, only one. And out of 350 households that were surveyed, that's a pretty small segment of the community.
I don't think that's what this document says.
Well, I was present when the oral presentation was made to the Planning Commission. I happen to have it recorded at home, and that was what was reported at the time, is that one respondent indicated size was a problem. If the information that was presented to the Planning Commission was not accurate, then my comment isn't relevant, but that's what they said at the Planning Commission. I have reviewed the planning, or the city's comprehensive plan. I commend you for approving it. I think it's a wonderful tool with which to manage growth in the city over time. It is not a city code requirement that has to be met or not met. It doesn't govern or not govern, or doesn't rule in or rule out any particular proposal, but it does, everything that's been presented to you is fully consistent with the comprehensive plan as it's written. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. McGuire? Okay, thanks. Does anybody else want to talk to us about this evening? Okay, didn't want to miss anyone else. Mr. Kirk.
After all that discussion, I just wanted to be clear that we're eager to move forward here, and hope that you'll send us formally to council so that we can, you folks can vote on this, and I hope that you'll send us there next week.
What do people think? Amy?
Well, there are some questions that we have to still get answered right before we can move forward with it.
Yeah,
Is that right?
I tried to pull a list out of what notes I had jotted down as we were discussing. I still feel like there's more than one set of plans in the recommendation that we received from the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission's meeting Thursday. I would like clarification about this is the plan we're recommending that you approve, instead of, so that the final document is not something that's open to a lot of question and dissent about, well, I thought they said this and I thought they said that. I would like one set of
Does that mean that we
documents.
have to go back to Planning Commission, present, and get it approved again, or is
No.
that something that I?
No, I think the Planning
We have the
Commission could
January
just.
25th is the date
But I
Right.
can
for
compile
the
a
submission, yes.
Right, and so some of the documents do go with the final plan.
Mm-hmm.
The work that you did, the stuff about the neighboring properties, or all of that kind of documentation. But the things that aren't really part of it anymore, I just want one file that has the recommendation. I think the Planning Commission could do that without another full presentation. Does that seem possible for the
We
Thursday
have it,
meeting?
we can adjust it for you if that's, gives you
It
clarification.
still needs to be reviewed and signed off by Planning Commission, whatever I submit again? Is that
No,
what-
no.
is that what I'm
We
hearing?
just need
Okay,
the
no.
clarification on, so that they understand what's there.
And the mayor could maybe
It's
just
a
look.
clerical task. I mean,
Yeah.
you want the planning commission to sit there and put a book together for you based upon the two things.
No, I just want the
would-
recommendation that comes to us to be the one plan that you're asking us to approve. So somebody can put that together and get that to us, so that there's not any question about which map we're looking at, which plan we're looking at. People can review just the thing we're being asked to approve.
Okay. We think you have it with the
Okay.
January 25th submission. Which is
Parts
right
of the
here,
other
but
one
we'll be happy to
With the
resort it
same-
for you. if
Right.
that's
Those
what you need.
replace pages in the other ones.
Yes.
Pull the old, put
Right,
the
we'll
new
pull the
in.
development agreement out of there because it's no longer
Yeah.
valid.
The
Pretty simple.
the water line stuff,
I
just
don't know
just
why.
get the one plan,
Just do it.
so that 10 years from now, somebody else looking at this knows this is what the decision was made based on this recommendation and this plan, not the two different options. I think we're talking about asking the law director for an opinion about whether a variance is needed from Title 27.
Now, you folks know that you have an opinion letter from your engineer on that says that we comply. Do you know that?
The mayor said that there is one. It's not in the documents that we have yet, so.
Okay.
But you're talking about slope stability, and there's the newer statement there about preservation of the general size and shape of the topography. And I think that's the question that citizens have raised and that we're asking for clarity on.
Right, and it is in the statement of purpose or scope, and there's not one word in all of the slope stability and all the rest of the thing that says, what is the change of the topography? Council never bothered to define it.
So I think we're asking for some clarity on that from the law director. You're going to talk to the Tree Commission and the Disability Commission.
Yes.
I have a question about Parcel C and this the fact that you're seeking blanket approval for something that we don't see drawn on the plans. And I don't know if that's a Gary question, or if that's something the Planning Commission should talk about.
We can talk about it too. I mean, usually when any other structure is added to it, it takes approval.
So that would be
because it's a modification to the
a major
plan use
modification?
development. A building is a major modification,
Okay.
you know. We did it with numerous other projects.
So would that mean that the blanket approval would be, in a sense, removed from this plan? Since even if we did it, we have to approve it anyway, so there's no such thing as blanket approval. If that's what I,
The way I understand it, you would be given a blanket approval of a land use, which is more like a rezoning.
Well, I think it's a moot point because the base zoning is R3. So if further development wants to be done after the original got approved, yeah, you'd still be coming in, I want to modify the existing PUD. It still would be a non-conforming, permitted conditional use under the base zoning would be your basis for it. And then you would discuss how would this change or impact what was done, but you'd still have to approve it.
okay, right.
I mean, it's...
So the blanket approval is not really an approval.
It is an approval for what exists today, but the PUD stands for 50 years. Changes will happen. You have to have a mechanism in the law to say, oh, okay, years have passed and now we want this change to this project, and the Planning Commission is charged in law with the initial determination. Is this a minor change to a PUD, or is this a major plan that would take expert? You have to have, nothing gets set forever.
The purpose in creating a PUD is to have more flexibility than traditional zoning and to allow mixed uses and to allow concentration of density so you can have more green space. There are a variety of reasons that traditional zoning wouldn't always come up with the best kind of layout and use of a site, but it seems odd to me to talk about a PUD but then go rely on the base zone for a potential future change, because the concept of a PUD is to talk about that more precise planning for the entire site.
Right. But,
so, Mayor.
But point out that the base zoning of R3 is one that says multi-family, multi-residential use. The way the code is written, if that's one building, it's administrative approval. If it's multiple buildings, it then forces it to become a PUD. So if you want multiple buildings on various sites, or the thing could be done is you can subdivide an existing piece of tract of property into 4 other tracts, as long as you have public road frontage for all of them. That's another thing, and they build 4 buildings on 4 lots. I mean, part of it is this, you're locked into some of the way we're doing this in the process because of what previous councils passed and created what our subdivision and planning and zoning codes and the PUD regulations.
Is this referring to parcel C? I'm talking about parcel C. My question was on parcel C.
Parcel C is vacant ground at this stage.
I know. And my question on parcel C was, it is my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that part of what you're asking for is kind of this blanket approval for other users, other potential users of that parcel.
We are asking for a blanket approval of
Correct.
a land use.
Of the land use, okay.
Right, a conditional land use, making it a permitted use so that it could be marketed to someone who might want to do a hotel.
Right.
Someone who might want to do.
And my question is, would that have to then come to us for approval? Like somebody said, I want, we have a user, I should say this, who wants to build a large, wine store. Okay, I have a hotel use, in other words, would that use have to come before us for approval?
I believe that's what the mayor is saying.
That's, in my
That's what
opinion,
you're
it
saying.
would. If you
Okay,
want
okay.
that further stated.
No,
in-
so what
well,
I'm saying
saying
is.
in the law directors,
Yeah.
you're going to write one letter to him, you might as well
Yeah.
add a second paragraph.
Okay.
And ask that question.
Okay.
Can I ask a
Oh,
question?
okay.
Does the land use have to come back before council? If you had a hotel user and there was an approval here or a nod that, yes, we would accept a hotel on the site, would the land use be approved already so that there would be rights associated
We
with
can't
that
bind,
parcel C?
I don't think
So
we
this
can
isn't like
bind a
normal
future
PUD.
council for something that's this vague. You know, you're not bringing a
So
proposal
if
to
you
us
guys,
about
if
what
you guys supported, if the council right now supported that land use on that piece of property, you say you can't bind a future council?
a future council could
That
decide what it
land-
decided.
Any land use is permitted in a PUD because it overlays the zone. And it doesn't, I mean, all the R3 conditional uses or permitted uses are, say, these are permitted or these are automatically granted. Conditional uses are
Sure.
a recommendation
And
that
that's
on
what
a
we're asking
case-by-case
for them to be
basis, the zoning board should okay it in the case of normal, one building type construction things.
It sounds
If
to me
it's
that we
multiple
should just take that
buildings,
off.
Well, see, that's what
Yeah,
I
if
was
it's
thinking.
multiple
I think
buildings
I
and
think
a
it adds
B3,
complexity.
that's administrative approval.
Okay, and
If
a
it's-
further question, is this all currently one lot? Are these things that you're calling parcels, are they separate lots with actual
They would be.
lines recorded currently?
No. No, there's only a couple of tracks up there
Right now, but
that are there
Current-
now,
I mean,
and that's,
You
if this
could
were-
subdivide
right,
it.
the
You
different
could
parcels
see-
would be different parcels. They might go to different ownership. I mean,
They,
say
are
say
there
a Chipotle or
currently,
a Starbucks
like,
came in here and
lines
wanted this.
recorded in the county recorder's office that those are different lots?
They would be.
no.
There are
They're
not.
not now.
Not now.
Right, but if the
So
PD
it
went
is, it's
forward-
your interpretation that by calling it parcel C, that you're creating a lot that would be
Parcel.
recorded?
That's right.
Is that
That
your
was the initial
understanding?
discussions. I don't remember it being discussed at the final.
Because I hadn't heard
approval.
that.
But initially, when it was presented, it had.
So it's a
two other-
PUD and a subdivision?
They just talked about a mixed-use PUD, having residential and commercial on the same site, which the code does address.
Right.
And their initial and the preliminary approval was based upon it had these other two parcels. The final that we saw didn't have any buildings or anything on them. So we didn't really think or discuss about, we're approving that, it's just, it's
Is-
there on the final.
It looked
Is
like
there
green
anything here
space.
that's like a survey with lot lines that you're seeking to record? Like a plat?
There's a sub-area plan that was associated with the,
One of these things?
yeah, there's the-
Now, the PUD is not a method to subdivide land.
No, that's what I'm confused about, what you think is happening here. These lines here, where you're showing an 8-foot side yard setback, were you assuming that that created separate lots?
yes.
Okay, I don't think that's the case.
And that doesn't go through at the same time as a PUD?
If you applied to subdivide
I don't
it,
think you have a lot of desire to own a motel. You would need to sell that off.
Correct.
I mean, we've been asking for this for a long time, and we haven't had any of this surface.
Because
I mean,
nobody asked the
we're-
questions.
Pardon me?
I was going to say, maybe nobody asked the questions.
No.
it would be
Yes, we've asked the
No.
questions.
You've asked them.
about what it would take to make that happen.
Well, we've presented this for months now. I guess I just
I don't
understand.
think there's a way to create a separate lot without applying to subdivide it. A PUD generally, I think, applies to the existing lot lines. It doesn't change the underlying ownership and the lots of record at the county recorder's office.
Right, because ours, PUD is is not part of the zoning code, it's not part of the subdivision code, it's just a separate chapter under the code that in essence creates an overlay zone in the zoning code, and that's all it does.
Subdivision
It's in the
It's in the
subdivision
subdivision
regs.
regs.
Well, but it doesn't create a subdivision.
Right.
No.
And the reason, it used to be in the zoning code, council a number of years ago took it out of, with the planning commission concurrence, out of the zoning code and into directly so that the PUD regulations could be modified by council without recommendation of the planning commission.
I didn't do that.
No, I'm saying the previous council did. That's what happened.
Way
That's
previous
historically
council.
happened.
Yeah.
You can blame Ed.
And it's been going back and forth ever since then. I mean, because it caused a lot of confusion.
Still does.
So if at a future date, somebody wanted to buy that land and build a hotel there, you would have to seek to subdivide the land to be able to sell it. Is that correct?
That's the way my interpretation is. I'll let the attorneys duke it out.
Okay. Paul?
My impression of a PUD is that you're looking at it in totality, and therefore this parcel C is part of the PUD. So I have a problem saying you're just going to cut off, put an Applebee's, a Hotel Hampton there, a CVS, because this is about as big as what we're talking about for the engineering area. Again, we're also talking about using this for a drainage and riparian area too, it looks like. So when we start talking about taking off pieces of it, paving it over parking lots, it will change the character.
Because part of the required stormwater management would then be on a
And
lot
we've
under
talked about
different
sizing-
ownership.
We've talked about sizing that basin to consider that impervious coverage in the future.
With
It could be modified to.
with easements or some kind of deed
It would need
restriction.
some sort of a homeowners association, for lack of better terms, but a common open space that has a detention basin in it, that everybody would have to contribute to any kind of improvements, or not improvements, but maintenance of the pond and those types of matters.
Bojinka?
Okay, now, would it be simpler if I understand this correctly, this blanket approval for other users of this land is what our issues seem to be? Okay, would it be simpler if you did not ask for that? I mean, would it solve a lot of these issues around, this, if you simply took that out of your development and said, here's what we want to build,
If it were
these buildings
flexible
on
enough
this
that
hill.
somebody could come back in with that parcel and not get any conditional uses or anything permitted, but that there could be a lot split, I guess I just don't understand exactly what the process is for
I don't think
separating these two. I mean,
there's anything that council could do in this approval process that would guarantee that you could do that later. You would be coming back either doing a major modification of a planned unit development or asking to subdivide the land and create a new lot and then comply with those lot requirements. There's no way to kind
but you
of
can
get.
come back in with a PUD that was zoned and subdivide a piece of land that wasn't approved or talked about during the original PUD.
Yeah. You can modify an
That's
existing
interesting because
PUD.
usually, this is just me from experience, a PUD offers flexibility, but it also sets things in place that, as a governing board today, felt were very important at the time. So, but if we get a PUD zoned somewhere and we come back in and we start carving up open space and using it for retail and hotels, and during the next administration, it doesn't fulfill the idea of the PUD of the time.
No, I agree with what you're.
That seems strange. I mean, that seems strange.
It does.
Well, it could be. You know.
Could be strange.
All right.
It's another instance where having a planner on staff would be really helpful. So we hope people are applying for that job.
That would be helpful.
It would be very helpful.
What about the commercial piece in the front then? It has a B3 underlying zone that we could say this is all PUD and this is the B3 over there, and we get our lot frontage, and we don't have any PUD overlay over that piece or anything.
That's possible.
I guess the thing that feels strange about it is that you are seeking approval of a PUD where we're supposed to be thinking about the whole thing, but you're saying we might want to do something here later, we don't know what. And so what you said.
You could come in for a plan review to talk about the parking lot and coverage, lot coverage. I mean, we could write some text that would set some limitations on those types of things, which we thought we had done with the development matrix and some other things.
What do people think about how we proceed with this? I mean, I don't think we've approved a PUD before that had kind of conceptual things that were not currently in the plan. And I don't know, I've been to a bunch of the planning commission meetings, but not all of them, so I really don't know what your discussion about this was and how you would think we handle it.
At the preliminary stages, when it first was presented to us, it was presented in such a way that we never really got to some of the fine points of it, because in midstream, those went away. They were solely concentrating on the housing development. And all of the discussion then was always on the housing development.
So you never saw plans for this, or?
We saw in the original submission
Right, we never took it away. We took roof lines that were illustrative.
Right.
To give people an idea of how this thing might build out. The original plans, we did have some roof lines on here, and a little roof and some parking lot, a little drive-through. We took them off because they were sticking points that everybody was getting caught up on, that these things were gonna be built today, which they're not.
But they could be in the future.
That's right, that's the intent, and that's the desires, is that this is still an important.
And see, when that was
Right.
said to the planning commission, because of the way we've handled other developments, to say, oh, that's a modification some years in the future. We'll deal with it then.
Right, I mean,
And
that's,
that's what all the planning commission members thought, because that's the way they'd always done it.
But then when you talked about it here, it sounds like you're talking about selling it off, and that
Sure.
feels different to me
I mean, if
than.
you're a golf course developer and you do a PUD that has some retail village out in front, typically those people don't want to deal with leasing up retail space. They sell it to someone to come in and build it and lease
And
it.
they're outlots.
Or outlots, sure.
Yeah.
And so that was the intent here, yes. I don't think Edwards has any desire to own the lot that Chipotle sits on, or at least that's not the business that you're in.
Correct.
You're trying to get a
You know,
apartment project.
we've been focusing on the multifamily. That's what
That's the important or the?
I'm listing here. We want you folks to give us a decision on this. If there's a contingency on the handicap commission, we'll go through that. Tree commission. We want you to vote on this. You all know that we've spent a long time on this, and these details are important. We got to have some standard of moving forward here, or not. We don't, it's not fair for us to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars here proceeding ahead only to have you say no to us, if that's what you're gonna do. So I'm trying to ask for the ability to bring this forward to you, to have you vote. If it needs to have those things, I mean, this is sort of, it's been not
Right,
the
this
front
one-
issue because of the discussion points. We don't wanna get hung up on that.
Right, but we have to deal with the details, because otherwise we clean up the
You do?
messes later.
Sure. But,
So-
and so we're taking your administration's direction here and bringing forward. So tell us, give us some parameters here in quick measure so we can proceed ahead.
Right.
I'm going to tell you that this commercial component is not our hangup. There's lots of challenges that it's not, we didn't plan it out because it's lots of difficulties with it. We want to proceed ahead with this multifamily. That's our issue. If we can figure that out, and this is.
We have an existing subdivision where there were deed restrictions for swales, for stormwater runoff, and homeowners didn't like the little boggy areas in their backyards and took them out. And stormwater ran down onto homes below. You know, that we've had things where people didn't follow through with the details in the plans, and we have to be sure that that's all taken care of. So
Yeah, and
if
in
you're
that
talking
specific-
about selling this off and the stormwater detention for this project is there, we have to understand how this is going to
We're
work.
talking about a use, yes, you do. We're talking about a use, and when a plan comes by, it has to meet those stormwater and design regulations. If a building goes there, it's gonna go to your civil engineer to be reviewed for all of the compliance of those things.
No, but I appreciate that right there, that statement, and it's giving us something to react to that yes, we could draw some easements on here that help give some government or some enforcement if someone were to go in and start changing the shape of the pond or taking it outside of where it should have been. I understand that.
Okay, I think Carol had something.
Just in answer to your question, clearly we have to understand exactly what we're voting on too. And that being said, I've got a question concerning the green space of the project. Could you remind me what the percentage is, or and then the other half of the question is, does that include that area down there?
Right now, I put together a development matrix that has parcel A, B, and C. Each one has its own maximum coverage and limitations put to it. So parcel C, I think we put in the estimated population in a plus or minus 84 dwelling units, or 84 dwelling units maximum would be allowed on that piece. And what we were trying to do is set some parameters to what might go in there and control it so that it's not overbuilt with a 20-story tower. The impervious surface and all the coverage information is all separated out per parcel. So right now it's not figured as one long piece. Does that help?
Did you answer my question? Do you have it broken out to the actual green space? Okay.
Lot coverage. Parcel A, 11.5%. There's a maximum of 40% in the R3. Parcel B, we just put in a maximum of 40%. Under the B3 zoning, it would have 0. But, you know, we have a lot of open space that's going to happen in there anyways. Parcel C was a maximum of 40%.
Okay.
And we did that for the landscape islands and the parking lots as well, 8% on parcel A, and then the other two have a minimum of 5% on them because that's what code is right now. So we're trying to set up as many limitations as we could on these other two parcels.
Thanks.
I think, you know, one of the other substantive questions for me, and there was some disagreement about what the survey showed, but one of the things that we've heard a lot is about the size, and that when the project was discussed at 600 beds, the Southside Community Association did not object. You know, there was some discussion early on about what people felt like they could live with on this site in terms of traffic impact, you know, what it would mean in terms of impact on the site when it's developed. What kind of flexibility is there in dealing with the actual size of the project and the number of units that you're talking about?
None, ma'am. We want you to vote on the proposal we have, period.
Debbie, if I remember, Coral, who was the developer that was talking about the 600, was at the planning commission stage, and when he went back to Dowdy to renegotiate the ground lease, he withdrew the proposal because he couldn't make $600 beds financially work. So it never was actually approved by the planning commission. So it was withdrawn as, I can't do it if I can't afford to.
Can I ask you a question on the intent of reducing the number of beds, or how does anybody base that this is too dense? What is the basis?
The things that I have mostly heard people talk about are the amount of soil being removed from the hill and traffic concerns, and you know, I don't think if you do the math in terms of the acreage you're talking about that it's too dense. I don't think it's density per se. I think it's talking about impact on the landscape and the viewscapes in our community that people have expressed concern about. That's what I've heard. Carol?
And the number of students in that vicinity. It's Carriage Hill, University Courtyard, and this that comes out to over 2,000 students, or 2,000 residents, I should say.
Does that mean that?
And it seems like a heavy impact on the south side.
Shouldn't that be taken in context with what the existing zoning allows?
I'm telling you what the concern is.
I know, I'm asking.
Not-
And I guess from my opinion, if we reduce this by a building, how much improvement would that be on the overall grading and impact on the hillside? I don't think it's going to be any. And I guess my argument would be that by reducing the number of beds here, it's going to do nothing but impact the neighborhoods and possibly other hillsides. And I think from a land use standpoint, and I understand the fact that they're all consolidated into one little area of the city, but also, you know, when we go in and try to get other student housing developments zoned, and they're around single-family residences, that's never a good situation that we've ever run across. So, I mean, this site is actually pretty much contained or isolated over by itself with other similar land uses, and from a logical standpoint, it just seems to make some sense for this site.
Debbie?
Paul?
It's not always density, it's just size, I think what I hear. This is too big, period. I mean, the image most people walk around with is this is a small city. It may have an 800-pound gorilla, but it's still a small city. And therefore, it's just too big. That's usually what I hear, period.
And I always say, well, okay, what is it then? What is it, 20 beds, 30 beds, 40 beds, 200 beds? That's what we needed to hear.
That, I don't know. I mean, it depends on who you talk to at that point.
Well, I know, but that's what we have to have you guys give us a decision on. That's what we've been trying to do to get that.
The other understanding is we would have to go back to Planning Commission if anything like that changed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if anything else we're talking about here would kick that in. We can approve something that's modified from what the Planning Commission recommended if we have a 3/4 majority.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't necessarily have to set things back. So, I mean, if it's something that makes the project acceptable to a lot of people in our community, and there's, you know, a lot of support, then it doesn't necessarily slow anything down.
So what is the number then? Tell
What
us.
I heard from people in the community was that they didn't object at 600 beds. So I think some people want to comment.
Quickly.
When Tom Dowdy had that, it was Dale Tamke that threw out the 600-bed idea. And it just seemed like we were going to have to put up with something. So we actually just went along with that, and it was not to be because Tom couldn't make the numbers work. But, you know, it wasn't that we liked it. Yeah, there's 800, and say you put 882 students up there. They'll have a nice little community, but they've got to come down, and we've got this drainage area, which is Richland Avenue, and it's a very small corridor. And as I drove up it tonight to come uptown, I can tell you that as I look at how it's going to be widened, it's just kind of amazes me. But you know, it needs room for sidewalks, and it needs room for bicycle traffic, and we need 3 supposed good lanes of traffic to go through there, and it just boggles the mind because we have all of these commercial establishments right there, and it's going to be right up in their front door to be able to do that. And you add those 800 and some students walking over to the carry-out, it crossing without the light, no doubt. It's frightening.
Are we widening the street?
Not today.
If we had a TIF, we would have money to do it. Without a TIF, we can't do it. The money in there.
Okay.
We have to have a source of revenue.
Right, so at the moment, we're not planning on widening the street. right?
That's right, council said no development agreement, and that was where the TIF was placed. So it would have to be something that, if this gets approved, I gotta start back over again and work with the school system and the others and say, okay. But right now, council right now has said, no, they don't want TIF. I mean, they've rejected the whole development agreement, but I'd have to have some discussion with council to say, oh, well, we didn't mean that part. That part, we are still in it, or they're not.
And we could have that conversation.
Sure. And all it has to do is before the buildings are put on the tax valuation, you have to have that tax incremental financing agreement in place approved by the school board.
Okay.
That's a lot of work.
Something else, Jim?
No,
Okay.
nothing else, except I would just say that I agree with you that we have some questions that need to be answered. And with that, I don't see how this is going to come up for first reading next week.
I think it.
However, if, Mr. Kirk says he's spent enough money, he wants us to vote, then put it up as it is, and we'll vote on it. We have some legitimate questions we think we need answered before we make a wise decision. Maybe we'll make a rash decision, so we won't have to spend any more money.
Is that a fair request on my part?
To put it up for reading next week?
To have you give us some direction on whether you're going to approve this or not. That's what we want to know.
can't do
That's
that.
No, it really isn't.
Yeah. We
It
can't
really
do
isn't
that,
a
can
fair
we?
request.
Well, that's why I'm trying to understand what is, that's why I want
We
to
we
have a
have
discussion.
questions
The
that are-
information that I think we need are the 5 things that I listed, and I think Debbie probably has in the minutes, that we get down to the one set of plans you're asking us to approve, get a law director's opinion on Title 27, you get feedback from the Tree Commission and the Disabilities Commission, and I think we asked the law director about Parcel C. Does the inclusion of these parcel lines on here create lots that we then record? Like, just legally, what's happening with that process? And what would happen when you come back with somebody wanting to do something different on that land? Those are the things that I think, parcels B and C.
Okay. We think the Tree Commission is something that is fairly specifically delineated, and we'll have to comply with that. We have been through the process with the Handicap Commission, and we're well versed in that, so we feel comfortable with that. The question about the conditional uses, I hear you on that, and we're happy to clarify that and need to. The Title 27, we thought we had some direction, but you're going to ask your law director nonetheless. Those all sound like they're things that can, to me, that can be answered with clarity here, so that you guys can tell us and give some direction on this. The idea of the size, we're not here to compromise on that with this plan, so we want you to vote on it as is. So those are the things that we gotta hear, a yay or nay on. And we very much want to come forward and have some sense of fairness here for everyone.
And we will need to schedule a public hearing on this, and we need how much notice?
15 days, I believe.
I'd like to see the information that we're asking for and have a committee meeting in 2 weeks.
Agreed.
Carol?
I think what I'm hearing here is that Mr. Kirk wants to know if they're members of council, and obviously we can't do this here. We can't vote, in essence, tonight. But what he's wanting to know is if all of these things were complied, it would still be voted down. So he's wanting to know our council members going to vote no, no matter what.
Yes, ma'am.
Is that correct?
That's
Yes.
it.
So there's the sort of the disconnect.
Give us some direction here.
He's saying, you know, if all of this is for naught, that we're going to talk about this, we're going to do all of these things, and some people, no matter what, are going to vote the same way. I understand that,
Please, yes.
but we can't really answer that right now. But it's something for us as individuals to think about.
So, 2 weeks from tonight, hopefully we'll have response from the law director and,
Monday, right?
A Monday or Tuesday?
Monday.
you know, if you guys want to not schedule any other committee meetings,
Well,
I mean,
Well, I
have
thought we
some things.
discussed having the meetings on Mondays and not doing this Tuesday thing.
Now, you're talking about days a week, she's talking about other committees for the committee
Yeah,
night of
is-
Monday.
Well, I know, I need to have a
Is
transportation
that
committee,
like
I'm
the
not willing to
15th?
just.
That's the
I know.
second Tuesday.
Same here,
of-
environment.
I have
12th.
communication,
12th?
which I'd like to do first for change.
Or no, yeah, the 12th would be the
I'm always
next
last.
committee meeting.
Okay.
And I am not available on the 13th again.
well, we can try and have it on the 12th, but I have a concern about having a lot of committee meetings in a row when we're dealing with stuff that's complex and people feeling a lot of time pressure to be able to get through it.
Well, I'd say that my issue and yours would probably take a good 20 minutes, don't you think?
Mm-hmm.
At least. And it's an important one.
Okay.
And
So
another
what-
5 minutes
If
for
we're going to
another
have
issue.
this on the Monday, then I want it to be the first committee. And we take as long as it
No, I
needs.
wouldn't mind first.
We're not going to be able to decide what we want to do in 1 week.
No, I know that, but we have to
We'll fight
present
this out
so
later.
we
It
can
looks like
think
we're
about it.
talking
Isn't
about the
that
12th.
point?
We've already
We'll
decided
deal with the
that.
president of council about which committee happens first. Sounds like we have a little disagreement here, but you don't have to hear our scheduling issues. So, are there any miscellaneous items for
Yes.
planning and development?
Yes.
Okay, yes.
So what
Yes.
did we decide?
I'm sorry, I was talking to her.
Monday, the 12th.
Monday the
Okay,
12th.
pass those
Another
out.
committee meeting.
First.
Actually, here. So just in terms of, I didn't know this was exactly going to be the,
Oh, there's another issue?
no, these are two,
miscellaneous.
this is miscellaneous. There are two things that I thought we needed to do pretty quickly, and one of them is to review, and I was hoping we'd have a planner, but we don't, Title 27, and this is, you know, when we first, oh, is anybody else, Mary needs one? When we first started this, and this is one thing that I would like to proceed with. Title 27, this was the flow chart they gave us, and I'm not sure it works this way anymore. Landowner notifies city of impending development, and there are 3 different things that trigger a further study: moderate, severe landslip area, that would be soil designation, affecting a stream or channel, equal or greater than 1 acre of disturbed ground necessitates additional study. And then it goes through this whole, this was, you know, I was one of the last ones to vote for that law, Title 27, because I figured it would give us a lot of comfort and no teeth, and so I think it's probably still that way. And I would like to have somebody outside review this and see, you know, what are we doing, we've got it in different places, I'm not sure it's up to date. And then the other thing is, and it's just as the same thing, I had Andy do it, he was in class with me when he was in Iraq, and I had him review it, and basically how he would set it up this way. But this is what Sarah's group did a long time ago, so you see how they mapped it out as proceeding. So anyway, I'd like to sometime as the Planning and Development Committee contract with someone to do this. And then the other thing is, and you'll see this soon, historic preservation. And I'd like to see some of the tourism money go into hiring someone to do that historic inventory. We'll be back with a full-blown proposal shortly. As soon as Debbie gets the Ohio Historical Society recommendations, we'll do an RFP. And, you know, people have been talking about it for 20 years, so I think it's time to bite the bullet. And this thing probably needs revision too, it needs to be revised also.
Looks like it does.
Yeah.
Yes.
Implemented, maybe, it needs to be implemented. I'm not sure about revisions. Okay, guys, that's all. These are the two things that I've been working on.
Take a smart rat
Okay.
to run to this.
Any other miscellaneous?
Class or something.
Well, okay, those are my two
Looks
things.
pretty close to what we do.
Yeah, well, 1 acre disturbed means that there's supposed to be a study.
I mean, that's the basic rules in there, is if you're disturbing more than 1 acre, then you have to do, and that's why we have changed some of these to define that being in is our reviewer, and we're gonna send all to them, so somebody knows our ordinance well, and we aren't flipping from engineering company to engineering company, you know.
I'm all for that, especially the developer paying, but I just want to make sure that that we have, as you say, and, we're still waiting for let's find somebody who can tell us how to get the parameters down. Okay, that's all I wanted to do, and I'm sorry, I told you I wouldn't talk. I'm not sorry at all, no.
Any other miscellaneous?
No.
Okay, we're adjourned.
How are you?